Hello, world. My name is Scott, or you can just call me the bitter old queen. Okay. I just have to say right off the top, I'm not a therapist or a professional of any type, and my stories and experiences are anecdotal only. Okay. So this is my growing up gay episode. So here goes. Okay. I was born in a small town in Iowa, and we had about 3,500 people. Probably about 3,000 lived in town, and then 500 or more lived outside of town on farms. So I knew I was gay even before I went into kindergarten. I knew I was different, and I knew I needed to keep my mouth shut and all that stuff. I just sensed all this stuff. I was kind of an exceptional kid in that way. But when I got to kindergarten, I remember looking for other little gay boys like me, and there weren't any, or at least I didn't see any. I blame my underdeveloped gaydar. So um, when I got into first grade, my first grade teacher was a nightmare. Okay, she was she spotted that I was gay, and she misgendered me. She called me a little girl all the time, and she would make fun of me. And come to find out, this teacher would pick one student usually every year and make their life hell. Well, I was that student that year. Sometimes she picked two, but usually it was one. And if it wasn't a gay kid, it was a poor kid. So the other thing too is she was well connected in town and could do no wrong. And she did this for the longest time. Anyway, I hated her so much and I was terrible. And so I almost got held back in first grade. Now they put me on Ritalin halfway through. I was diagnosed hyperactive, and so they put me on Ritalin, and I don't even remember the last half of first grade. But I know I hated this woman, and the only way they let me pass into second grade was if I went to tutoring in the summer, which I did. So I went to tutoring, and um, the woman, I did all the math problems, and she was like, she went to show my mom, and my mom was like, "Oh my God, I was writing the wrong answer just to piss off this woman." And and I was behind in my reading, so I had to go to remedial reading and everything. But this woman was really awful and everything. And I just want to put a period on this, okay? This woman, uh, she ended up when my family moved away from that town, but my mother moved back when I was 18. And I was there that summer. I helped take another kid who had the exact same experience that I had in first grade. He was bullied by this teacher. Still, and this is 12 years later or whatever, and that family actually left town a year or two later. They just didn't want anything more to do with that town. And so they left and they moved to California. And have a feeling it was for their child. But anyway, it was weird because history was repeating itself and everything. So anyway, um, but then what's even worse is I went back to this town 5 years later. I was 23 and I went to church, and this woman, I didn't realize she was sitting in front of me. And then a few rows in front of me, and then they went up to get communion. And on her way back, I looked at my sister who was sitting next to me, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And I looked at the woman, and I said to her, "She's a dyke." And my sister's like, "Shut up, shut up!" And she grabbed my hand. She's like, "Just be quiet, don't make a scene or whatever." And I was like, "Okay." But there she was, my first grade teacher, and I swear she was a dyke. I took one look at her. I was like, "Oh my God!" I've known enough lesbians in New York to know what. Anyway, but I just thought this self-loathing woman, and it was just terrible that she'd done this for years and years and years. So, getting in second grade, okay, um, I had a wonderful teacher. She agreed to take me, even though I was behind, and she was the most wonderful woman. She was caring and kind and never made fun of me and all this stuff, and it was amazing. And she brought me back out. By the middle of third grade, I was out of remedial reading, and I was doing quite well on my own. And the other kids in town were actually really nice to me because they were just glad that they weren't the target. That's what I think. But none of the kids were really bad to me. Okay, now, then this is right before we moved when I was almost 11. And right before we moved, my mother used to go have coffee with this woman after school. And I would go with her sometimes because her son watched Star Trek, and my brothers wanted to watch something different, and I wanted to watch Star Trek. So I would ask, could I come over and watch Star Trek with Jeff, this guy, their son? And he was like 17 or something, or I think he was like 16 or 17. Anyway, he had his own bathroom upstairs and everything. So I was, we were watching Star Trek. I went to use the bathroom, and as I'm using it, I spy a little corner of a magazine. So I pull it out and I look. Well, it was the a full pictorial that, as far as I'm concerned, if they wanted to explain the birds and the bees, people should have, because I looked at this pictorial, which is a very long pictorial with a like double fold out and everything, and left nothing to the imagination. And I was like, I understood it all. Oh, okay, so this goes here and that goes there, and got it. So that was my first like, oh my gosh, now I get it. Even though I kind of knew, but I didn't really know, and I saw it firsthand. So anyway, I never said anything to anybody about that or my mother or anything. So, but we moved, man. Whoever tried to pick me up was a Catholic priest. My mother was in a Catholic hospital right after we moved. She had back problems, so she checked into a Catholic hospital, and I went to with my dad. And even though you had to be 12 to visit, I had just turned 11 because this was like June, and so I go with my dad, and my dad says, "You want to go down and get us a soda?" So the only thing at the time was in the basement of the hospital. There were wax-coated cups, no ice, no straws. You had to carry them like this, right? So I go down, and when I go out to the thing, the elevator's broken. They say, there were two elevators. One was broken. It was on the eighth floor or something. They said, please walk down if you're walking down. So I start walking down, and next thing you know, coming up is this Catholic priest, and he glommed onto me like I couldn't believe. And I understood exactly what he was doing almost immediately. I knew what he was up to. And he followed me all the way down there to the thing. On the way down, he took my hand and put money in my hand. And I told him, no, I don't want your, oh, keep it. He says, keep it. So I took it and stuck it in my pocket. And the whole time we're going down there, I was like looking at the adults, and they're all, going, "Oh, hi, Father, hi, Father," and I'm like looking at them, like, "Do you see this?" Same thing when we got to the cafeteria. Everybody's like, hi, Father," and I'm like going, "Do you see what he's doing? Can't you see he practically has his nose up my butt? Don't you see he's hunting and I'm the prey?" They didn't get it. So this guy followed me all the way back up to the room. I think I don't know what he was doing. I got away from him, followed me all the way back up to the room. He said he would come back and see my mom, and then he never did. But, the final day that when my mom was checking out, a few days later or whatever, I saw that when you came into the hospital, there was a big open desk and a big area with about 8 or 10 desks back there where the administration was. So I saw the father was back behind the administration desk when my dad and I went down to get the car. And so I said, "Hang on, Dad." And I went over to the administration desk and I'm like, "Hi, Father," and you know, there were about maybe six people back there. Three of them looked at me like, what a nice little boy. And the other three all glanced at each other like, oh God, another one? You know, my point is that there were some people there who knew what was going on, and this permission structure allowed it to go on. So I feel terrible because I never did anything about it or anything, but I was a kid, I didn't know what I was doing. I just was glad I was away from that person. But and it taught me right away at a very young age, just because someone is wearing a collar does not mean you can trust them. Okay? Because I think things would have gone a lot differently if that guy would have been able to get me a loan or something like that, or who knows, you know, if I was a weaker person or a little bit younger or something like that. Anyway, right after we moved to, my mom got out of the hospital and we made a trip to New York, and it was funny because when we were here, I think we came across, and I think we might have even been in my neighborhood here, but I remember my brother said to me, "Oh my God, I don't think I could ever live here." And I looked at her, and I said, "Really?" Because it feels kind of like home to me. It was a precursor of, oh my God, because it did. It felt like home. I remember we were over by B. Altman, and I saw the ladies coming out, and I thought, well, this is the kind of life. Anyway, it was great. So then when I was in sixth grade, These are just the big things that happened to me. Where I was changing after church with my brother, and we had to share a room in Pennsylvania. And so we're changing our clothes after church, and I said to my brother, I don't believe any of this stuff anyway. Well, he ran right out in his underwear, and my mom and dad are cooking supper, Sunday dinner. And he doesn't believe, he's not a believer, and he thinks this is a bunch of crap, and blah, blah, blah. So I went out and I was basically told that this is what was done in this house, my dad always had this thing about, he'd say, kids like you end up in reform school that don't do what their parents tell them to do. He was like threatening me with this stuff. So, it's very endearing. So anyway, I just, like I say, I was a queen in a world of commoners, and that's what I felt like. I was just like, oh, these people. Anyway, so what was funny is that it wasn't that long after that. I was probably 13. I couldn't have been more than 14 because we moved then again to Ohio when I was almost right after I turned 15. So I couldn't have been more than 14. And we were at a Phillies game one day, and I had bummed a cigarette from my brother. My dad used to get box seats for him and my mom and my sister, and he would buy the three of us, my brothers, cheap sheet seats up at the top, which were a lot more fun. So my brother wouldn't let me smoke out in the open. He says, check in the bathroom. So I go to the bathroom to go to a stall, and I open the door, and I was like, oh, sorry, there was somebody there. And he went like this. So do I need to tell you what happened while I was having my cigarette? What was interesting though is after that happened, the very next game we went to, there were attendants in the bathroom, and every game after that. But before that, there had never been attendants in the bathroom. So it's just quite crazy. But it was like, wow, I guess I got that one in under the wire or something like that. So, but it was not planned. Anyway, we moved to here it is my whole life. I go from cornfields to Amish country, and then we moved to Columbus, Ohio, north western Columbus, Ohio, which is actually Dublin. And it was this area that was growing leaps and bounds. I mean, every Monday in school, you'd get another child or two in your grade, and it just grew and grew and grew so fast. And I only spent 1 year there, but the thing is that right after we moved to Ohio, so I'm 15, it's June, we just got out of school, and as soon as we get there, I realized I have a hernia, and I had to go in and have this hernia operation. So I was laid up the whole summer. And while I was laid up, I remember lying on the couch and, stoned on Tylenol 3 or whatever it was. And then they had disco demolition happened. I don't know if you remember that. They broke into the programming. Oh my God, this is happening in Chicago right now. They were tearing the field apart. They were burning their disco records and everything. And I was a big fan of disco, and I used to love to dance and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, boom, that was it. There was no disco, and um, it was sad. And I realized right away what it was. It was anti-gay. It was anti-woman. It was anti uh, uh, ethnic. Because it's a combination of gay, black, and Latin music, pretty much all mixed in. And we were all the underground, and we all came together. And anyway, people didn't like that, so you got to get rid of that. So that happened on Thursday, July 12th of 1979. So, and I didn't realize how the hostility there was towards gays until that happened. And what was, it was really bad. So, anyway, as I'm sitting there recuperating during the summer, I'm looking through, there was nothing to read. So I look through my mom's cookbooks and I see Baked Alaska. So I decide I'm going to make Baked Alaska. Well, all this stuff happened at the same time. Disco demolition and Baked Alaska and my hernia surgery and everything. So the night I make the Baked Alaska, my dad comes home and he's sitting there looking at me. And this is like right after the disco demolition thing. And he's realizing I can just see it. It's hitting him like a ton of bricks that he's got a gay son. And it was like somebody was deflating him right in front of me. And he just like, he'd look at me and then he'd look down and look at me. And he never said anything to my mom, but it was never the same between us. Um, I was, you know, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I wasn't allowed to even go to school events. He thought he would keep me home, basically. And even my mom and my brother said, "What did you do or say?" And I said, "I don't know. I knew, but I didn't. I didn't want to say anything." I mean, as if they couldn't figure out. The only thing I owned were Barbra Streisand and the Olivia Newton-John albums, okay? And I listened to disco nonstop, okay? If you couldn't figure it out by then, okay? So, but right after this happened too, my dad was we were going to move again. I was going to spend my high school in four different schools: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, and then my dad was getting his own plant in Texas. Um, that that happened before Christmas because we went back for Christmas to Iowa, saw the family and everything. And my dad was he still couldn't get over it. He kept staring at me weird and everything. And I just was like, oh God, I hope he can get over this. I don't know if how well he would have done, but it would have been a struggle. So unfortunately, my dad died then. I was still 15. It was January 12th of 1980. And he suddenly died one night. I was at a YMCA sleepover. It was one of the first things he let me go to. It was a sleepover. And it was like with hundreds of kids and stuff. So, but and my mother had softened, and I swear that's what killed him. So, anyway, I'm joking, but anyway, my dad died then uh, a few weeks later, and I thought maybe he would have softened a bit on the issue over time, but I think it would have been a huge, huge problem. So, anyway, so here my mother's 39 years old. She's a widow. He's got a 10-year-old. My sister had actually just turned 11. And a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 19-year-old in college. So that's how my family was left. So, well, I decided for 10th and 11th grade that I was not going to stay at my high school. I hated it. It was the worst. And I went to vocational school for graphic arts. So, and we were all considered the rejects. 1982, it's about February, I'll say January, February. I was working and I came home one night and I remember I just smoked half a joint with somebody out in the parking lot of my job, and I drove home. So I'm just getting really wasted. And my mom says, "Well, when you're out of school, high school, I'm moving back to Iowa because it's time for me." I was like, "Oh, okay, fine." So, and I'm thinking that's fine. I didn't mind. I was planning to take off anyway, even though I didn't tell her that. So, but so great. So then next, we're watching this TV program. I don't know if it was 2020 or 60 Minutes or what it was, but they did a report on grid. And I'm sitting there and like my whole life is crashing down before me. I'm like, wait a minute here. I have waited all these years to come out and be me, and now there's going to be a terrible disease out there that's going to kill me. Oh my God. They called it grid. And I was just like, I was like in mourning then, for a week. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. So my mom moves back to Iowa then, and I go with her because I wanted to help her get set up before I took off. So I'm helping her settle in and get everything's taken care of, and then there was a girl at the gas station I used to go get my cigarettes at, and after a few times, she finally says to me one day, she goes, "I'm gay. Are you gay?" And I was just like, and it was the first time I finally said it. I said, "Yes, I'm gay," and it was a great relief. And then she says, "Well, there's a few of us in town. Why don't you come out to my place on Saturday night?" And blah blah blah. So I went to a little party of hers, and I met a couple guys one guy, I had no idea either of them were. One guy ended up becoming a thing, and another guy ended up not becoming a thing for a very short time because I left. Anyway, one of the things I said to me, well, let's go down to the local. There was a local 20 miles away, was a gay bar. There was one 20 miles south, 60 miles north, 100 miles east, or 100 miles west, or something like that. There were very few and far between. So they say, let's go down to this gay bar, and great. So we go in, and I you, I was 18, but you could drink like beer or something. I don't know. I didn't drink. I said, well, I only want soda anyway, but I was legal to be in the bar. and I'm drinking my soda, and I look over and by the door we came in, and I see that I said, "Why is there a big cinder block wall in front of the window there? What is that about?" And the girl says, "You know what happens? Oh yeah, they drive by here and shoot in all the time." I was like, "Really? They drive by here and shoot in all the time? Great." That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I said, "You know what? I think it's time." So one of the guys I met, John. Um, he lived in town. He was my brother's age, my oldest brother's age. He was 4 years older than me, but he had horses in a barn. Would you go out to his barn and check out the loft from time to time during the summer that I was there? So that was fun. But he did take me down to a bookstore, and I found the Advocate. Then it had the pink pages in the middle, and I decided on New York City. I said I got to go. And so I went to there was no place to do research, and my brother had encyclopedias, but he had taken them. So I had to go to the town library and look up New York, and I went and I bought uh, a road atlas at a bookstore, like in the remainder bin. It was like $1 or something, and it actually had a pretty good map of New York in it. So, and the reason I wanted to leave, really, it wasn't just for me. I mean, there was no life there for me, and I didn't want to stay there. And the thing is too about my mom and sister. My sister had 5 years left of school, and to have a big mouth gay brother in town like me would not have been good for either of them. So it really was best that I disappear and go away and let them live their lives. And it worked. They both had a nice, the next 5 years went very well for my sister and my mother. And so I was glad about all that. But anyway, I got this atlas and I tore out the New York page and pages, whatever, and I learned everything about where I was going. I knew exactly how I was going to take the Greyhound, get off the bus. I knew exactly where I was going to the Y and all that stuff. And without very much money in my pocket, I jumped on a Greyhound bus. It was early November of 1982, and I arrived in New York. Uh, you know, 18 hours later or whatever it was, and so I always said, that I wanted to be at least 1,000 miles away from these people. And if you do a Google Earth search right now, it's like 949 miles to my hometown. Not quite 1,000, but close enough. So anyway, thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe and do all that other kind of stuff. I'm trying to do this as fast as I can because I don't want to be boring. And I hope you enjoyed. There are points I missed, I'm sure, and I'll probably say it later. Oh, this was terrible, but I did my best. And all the best to you. And thank you very much for hanging in there. And may I just say, thank you for coming to court, and you have been dismissed.